Moments like this are exactly why NASCAR fans love this sport. One minute you're watching what appears to be a straightforward victory celebration, and the next minute a single comment creates conversations across the entire garage. What happened at the inaugural NASCAR race at Naval Base Coronado in San Diego is the perfect example of how one brief exchange can define an entire weekend and potentially spark a narrative that lasts much longer. This isn't just about a race result. This is about personalities, pride, competition, and the things that get said when emotions are running at their highest. And after what happened in San Diego, there's no question that something from the post-race moment has people talking. What should have been a straightforward victory celebration turned into one of the most discussed moments of the weekend. And depending on how you look at it, it may tell us a lot about the mindset inside one of NASCAR's most competitive organizations right now. The interesting part is that nobody seems completely sure how the comment was intended, but the way it was received has definitely caught the attention of fans across the garage. Today we're going to break down exactly what happened, why it matters, and what it could mean moving forward. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to NASCAR Hub. Thanks for watching. Corey Heim, at just 23 years old, achieved something he'd been working toward his entire life. In only his 13th start in the NASCAR Cup Series, the young driver did the unthinkable. He outdueled his teammate to secure his first career Cup Series victory. This wasn't against average competition either. He had to hold off Tyler Reddick down the stretch, a driver with significantly more Cup Series experience and seat time at the highest level. For a part-time driver making such a limited number of starts, this was the breakthrough moment every young driver dreams about. The win at Naval Base Coronado represented the biggest achievement of Heim's Cup Series career so far. Think about what that means for a second. Corey Heim outdueled Tyler Reddick for first NASCAR Cup win at inaugural San Diego race. This was a historic moment for multiple reasons. First, it was the inaugural NASCAR Cup Series race at Naval Base Coronado, making it a special event in NASCAR history. Second, Heim managed to beat a more experienced teammate in that inaugural event. Third, at 23 years old and with only 13 Cup Series starts, Heim was competing against drivers who had spent seasons, sometimes decades, working toward their first victory, and yet, he delivered. The significance of this victory cannot be overstated. Winning races in NASCAR's top division is incredibly difficult. Many talented drivers spend years, sometimes their entire careers, chasing victories and never get one. There are drivers who have competed in hundreds of races and never reached the checkered flag first at the Cup Series level. There are drivers with championships in lower series who have never tasted victory in the top division. For Heim to accomplish this in his 13th start is remarkable. It speaks to his talent, his racecraft, his ability to perform under pressure, and the team's execution on the day. What made the win even more impressive was the pressure situation Heim had to manage. Bubba Wallace was charging hard in the closing laps. The pressure was intense. Wallace looked capable of making a move late, but Heim stayed composed, protected the lead, and crossed the finish line first. It was the kind of performance that showed maturity, confidence, and the ability to handle pressure against one of the most experienced drivers in the organization. For a young driver trying to establish himself at the highest level of stock car racing, this was exactly the kind of breakthrough moment that can completely change the trajectory of a career. Career-defining moments don't come around often, and Heim sees this one with both hands. But the story doesn't end with the checkered flag. In fact, that's where things get interesting and complicated. When the race ended and both drivers climbed from their cars, Bubba Wallace approached Corey Heim. On the surface, everything seemed normal. This is typical behavior at the professional level. You have two drivers who just spent hours competing hard against each other, and when it's over, the professional thing to do is acknowledge the result and move forward. Wallace congratulated him, shook his hand, and acknowledged the accomplishment. That's what you want to see: sportsmanship, respect, professionalism. But then came the words that would spark endless debate among NASCAR fans: congrats. Enjoy this one. They don't come around too often. Now, here's where the interpretation matters, and this is crucial to understanding the entire situation. Some fans heard this as simply a veteran driver reminding a younger teammate how difficult it is to achieve success at the Cup Series level. After all, winning races in NASCAR's top division is incredibly difficult, and that's not just flowery language. It's statistical reality. The math doesn't lie. There are only 36 races in a Cup Series season. There are 40 cars in each race. That means mathematically, the odds of winning are roughly 1 in 36 for every driver, and that assumes everyone has equal equipment, which they don't. Some teams are more competitive than others. Some drivers have better equipment, some have worse luck. When you factor in all those variables, a Cup Series victory becomes even rarer than the raw numbers suggest. From that perspective, Wallace's comment could simply be interpreted as a statement of fact, an acknowledgement that Heim has just accomplished something difficult and should appreciate it. Many talented drivers spend years chasing victories and never get one. That's not controversial, that's just NASCAR reality. However, Corey Heim received the comment differently. And this is where things get interesting. When speaking with reporters after the race, Heim admitted that Wallace's words immediately caught his attention. He said that in that moment, he interpreted it almost as if Wallace was suggesting that this might be his only opportunity to win, or that he wasn't fully proven at the Cup level yet. And honestly, that interpretation is understandable when you think about it from Heim's perspective. Imagine spending your entire life working toward this moment. You've grown up around racing, you've competed in lower series, you've worked your way up through the ladder, you've proven yourself time and time again. You've gotten your opportunity in the Cup Series, and you've finally achieved it. You finally get your first Cup Series victory. The emotions are running high, you've just accomplished something every racer dreams about. Your family is celebrating, your team is celebrating. This is one of the greatest moments of your life. Then one of your teammates, someone you respect, someone who's been successful in this sport, says something that could be interpreted as questioning whether you'll ever do it again. The tone matters, the context matters, and most importantly, the way it lands with the person hearing it matters. Even if Wallace intended it as innocent, even if he meant it as a simple observation, Heim interpreted it as doubt. And in that moment, whether that doubt was intentional or not, it stuck with him. That's human psychology. That's how we process things. Sometimes the intention doesn't matter as much as the interpretation. And that's what happened here. Here's what Heim said about receiving the comment, and Heim admitted that the comment bothered him. He admitted he thought about it. He didn't brush it off. He acknowledged that it resonated with him in a way that stuck. And frankly, that's probably what most people would have done in that moment. If you just accomplished your biggest goal, and someone says something that could be interpreted as doubting your future, that's going to stay with you. What stood out was how mature Heim handled the entire situation. This is important because younger drivers sometimes respond emotionally. They snap back, they create drama, they post on social media, they make it worse. But Heim didn't do any of that. He didn't attack Wallace. He didn't create drama. He didn't accuse anyone of disrespecting him. He didn't make it a public controversy. Instead, Heim made it very clear that he respects Bubba Wallace and recognizes everything Wallace has accomplished to earn his place in the Cup Series. That's a mature response. That shows character. But Heim was also honest. He didn't pretend the comment didn't bother him. He didn't make excuses for it. He said it bothered him, he thought about it, and he's moving forward. And frankly, that's the honest response. That's the response that earns respect from people around the sport. Here's what Heim said about his approach moving forward. Rather than turning it into a public feud, he basically used it as fuel. He talked about how people will always have opinions. Some will believe you belong, others will think you don't. That's a profound statement. That's Heim acknowledging that there will always be skeptics. There will always be people who doubt him. That's part of being a young driver trying to establish himself. You have to deal with doubt both from others and sometimes from yourself. And instead of responding with words, Heim wants to respond with performance. He essentially sent a message without directly calling anyone out. And that's the statement right there about his mindset. That's exactly the kind of attitude that creates narratives. That's exactly the kind of approach that, if he backs it up with results, could define his entire career. Because he didn't create headlines through controversy or drama. He shifted the focus back to performance. He's saying, I hear you. I understand what you said. And I'm going to prove you wrong by winning again. Now, as the evening continued, and as the story developed, several people around 23XI Racing tried to calm down the situation. This is important context, because it gives us another perspective on what Wallace's comment really meant. According to individuals close to the organization, Wallace's comment may have been less about Heim and more about frustration over how the race unfolded. One team member reportedly suggested that Wallace felt the team had let a winning opportunity slip away because of strategy decisions during the race. In other words, Wallace might have been frustrated with his own situation, not necessarily with Heim's abilities. Another person close to the organization said the comment was never intended to suggest that Heim didn't belong in the Cup Series. Instead, they described it as a competitor speaking emotionally after coming up just short of victory. That's an important distinction. If Wallace was frustrated with the team's strategy and the way the race played out, his comment might not have been about Heim at all. It might have been about his own disappointment. It might have been about the what-ifs going through his head. This context is important because fans weren't getting Wallace's side of the story directly. What's notable is that Wallace himself did not publicly address the situation before leaving the track. That means fans are left trying to interpret the exchange based entirely on Heim's comments and explanations coming from people around the team. Because of that, the story remains open to interpretation. Was it a harmless veteran comment about how difficult winning really is? Was it frustration from a driver who felt victory slipped away? Or was there a little more competitiveness behind it than some people want to admit? Let's be real about something. Bubba Wallace is one of the most competitive drivers in the garage. If you spend time around competitive athletes at the highest level, you understand that the competitive fire never really turns off. When you're used to winning, when you're used to being the best. Losing is difficult, and it was more complicated than just losing this particular race. Earlier in the race, Wallace raged at 23XI Racing for a pit stop blunder during the Anduril 250 at Naval Base Coronado. This wasn't just Wallace being frustrated about losing to Heim. This was Wallace dealing with multiple frustrations. His strong early run unraveled late in Stage 1 on Sunday after that pit stop issue. So when the race ended with Heim taking the victory, Wallace was dealing with multiple layers of frustration: the pit stop problem that hurt his chances, the strategy decisions that didn't work out, the missed opportunity late in the race, and the reality that a teammate in his 13th start just beat him. That context matters. When you understand the full situation, you understand why Wallace might have said something that came across the wrong way. Every driver says emotions run highest immediately after a race. Think about what drivers experience in those moments. They've been in a car for 3 or 4 hours. They've been pushing at the limit. Their heart rate is elevated. The adrenaline is still pumping. Their emotions are raw. Disappointment, frustration, excitement, and adrenaline are all colliding at once. Sometimes things get said differently than intended. Sometimes comments come out harsher than planned. And sometimes a sentence that feels harmless to one person lands completely differently with the person hearing it. That doesn't excuse anything if the comment was disrespectful, but it does provide context. And context matters when you're trying to understand what really happened. So was it a harmless veteran comment about how difficult winning really is? Was it frustration from a driver who felt victory slipped away? Or was there a little more competitiveness behind it than some people want to admit? That's the question NASCAR fans are debating right now. And honestly, without hearing from Wallace directly, we may never know the full truth. We have Heim's perspective, we have accounts from people around the team, but we don't have Wallace's own explanation. The biggest takeaway should not get lost: Corey Heim won the race, and not only did he win, he showed the composure of someone who belongs at this level. The way he handled the pressure during the race was impressive. He had to protect his lead against experienced competition, and he did it. The way he handled the post-race comment was equally impressive. Instead of creating headlines through controversy or firing back with aggressive statements, he shifted the focus back to performance. That's the kind of attitude that often helps drivers build long-term success in this sport. And honestly, that should be the headline. A young driver won his first race and handled the aftermath with maturity. That's a positive story. Think about what this moment reveals about Heim's character and maturity. A 23-year-old kid just won his first Cup Series race. His emotions are sky high. He receives a comment that could be interpreted negatively. Rather than responding emotionally in that moment, which would be completely understandable, he processes it, acknowledges it bothered him, but then uses it as motivation. That's maturity. That's the kind of response that earns respect from people around the sport. That's the kind of response that shows he's ready for the next level. Compare that to how many young drivers might have responded. They could have been defensive. They could have attacked Wallace. They could have made it a bigger drama. They could have used social media to escalate things. But Heim didn't do any of that. He took the high road. He showed respect. He acknowledged the comment bothered him, but used it as motivation. That speaks volumes about his character. Now, let's talk about what this moment means for both drivers moving forward. For Corey Heim, this victory is a game changer. A first Cup Series victory can change confidence overnight. It can change how teams view a driver. It can change how competitors view a driver. And perhaps most importantly, it can change how a driver views himself. Before this victory, Heim was a promising young driver with limited experience. After this victory, he's a proven winner at the Cup Series level. That's a different conversation. That's a different level of credibility. But the challenge for Corey Heim is proving that San Diego was not the peak. The challenge is proving it's only the beginning. Because whether Bubba Wallace intended it or not, that comment has now created a narrative. Can Heim win again? Can he become a consistent contender? Can he establish himself as a future star at the Cup level? Those are questions only future races can answer. But based on what we saw in San Diego, both the dominant driving performance and the measured, mature response to adversity, it's hard not to feel excited about what's ahead. For Wallace, this moment is more complicated. He didn't lose a race to someone at his level. He lost a race to a teammate in his 13th start. That's a difficult pill to swallow for a competitive driver. And if the narrative develops that he was frustrated and made a comment that came across as disrespectful, that could affect his public perception. But Wallace has also shown throughout his career that he's a driver who responds to challenges. If this becomes motivation for Heim, it could also become motivation for Wallace to prove something about himself. The team dynamics at 23XI Racing are also worth considering. This is a competitive organization. They have multiple strong drivers. They're fighting for championships. When you have multiple talented drivers on one team, there's always competitive tension. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It can drive performance. But it also has to be managed. If there's perception of disrespect between teammates, that could affect team culture. But from what we've heard from people around the organization, they're handling it maturely. For NASCAR fans, this is exactly the kind of storyline that makes a season more interesting. You've got a rising young driver earning a breakthrough victory at an inaugural race, an accomplished teammate frustrated after coming so close, and a conversation that may end up motivating someone for months to come. This is the kind of drama that doesn't need to be manufactured or exaggerated. It's organic, it's real, it's compelling, and honestly, I have a feeling this won't be the last time we hear about this moment. If Heim keeps winning, people are going to remember exactly what was said after this race. If he goes on to have a successful Cup Series career, this moment becomes a turning point. This moment becomes part of his story. This moment becomes the thing that made him more determined. If that happens, this little post-race exchange could end up becoming one of those moments we look back on as the beginning of something much bigger. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to NASCAR Hub. Thanks for watching.